The crowd roared in anticipation, a thunderous wave of excitement rolling through the packed arena. Lights blazed down onto the ring, casting long shadows as the two men stood in opposite corners, each an icon in his own world. On one side, the baddest man on the planet, a former undisputed heavyweight champion whose fists had shattered opponents and sent legends to the canvas in mere seconds. On the other, a towering figure, a master of mind games and endurance, a man who had dominated an entirely different battlefield, known for his unshakable presence and eerie resilience. Mike Tyson and Mark Calloway, two titans from separate realms, now standing face to face in the ultimate collision of power, skill, and intimidation. This wasn't just another fight. It was an event that defied expectations. A clash between boxing's most feared knockout artist and a legend of the squared circle who had built his legacy on sheer will and psychological warfare. The energy inside the building felt almost primal, as if the walls themselves struggled to contain the force of what was about to unfold. Fans from both worlds had debated endlessly. Could the raw, explosive power of Tyson break through the unyielding presence of Calloway? Or would the dead man's ability to withstand punishment prove too much for even Iron Mike to handle? Tyson, pacing like a caged predator, exuded the same aura of destruction that had made him the most feared man in boxing. He didn't believe in long fights. He never needed them. His philosophy was simple: overwhelm, destroy, and move on. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring, ready to launch forward the second the bell rang. The years had not dulled his ferocity, and though time had changed him, the fire in his eyes still burned just as fiercely as it did in his prime. This was his domain, his world, and he wasn't about to let anyone step into it without paying the price. Calloway, in contrast, stood motionless in his corner, his eyes locked on his opponent with a quiet intensity. He was no stranger to facing giants, to enduring brutal wars that pushed the limits of human endurance. Where others had crumbled under pressure, he had only grown stronger, feeding off the energy, the doubt, the very idea that he could be broken. This fight wasn't just about power. It was a battle of presence, of who could bend the other to their will. His calm, almost eerie stillness was a weapon of its own, a silent message that he was not here to fall. The arena seemed to hold its breath as the referee stepped forward, giving the final instructions. The contrast between the two was undeniable. Tyson, a coiled storm ready to explode, and Calloway, a looming figure of calculated patience. The questions that had fueled the hype for this match lingered thick in the air. Would Tyson's speed and devastating power be enough to put Calloway down? Or would the legend's endurance and mind games drag Iron Mike into unfamiliar territory? The sound of the opening bell shattered the silence, and in an instant, Tyson lunged forward, wasting no time. The crowd erupted, knowing exactly what was coming. He had no intention of letting this fight turn into a drawn-out war. His fists were already moving, a blur of pure aggression aimed at the man who stood before him. But just as he closed the distance, something unexpected happened, something that sent a shockwave through the arena and changed the course of the fight before it had truly begun. Tyson's right hand shot forward like a missile, aimed straight at Calloway's jaw, a punch designed to end fights before they even began. It was the kind of strike that had dropped world-class boxers in an instant. A thunderous force backed by years of experience, raw aggression, and a history of knockouts that sent chills down the spines of even the toughest opponents. But instead of crumbling under the impact, Calloway did something that no one in the arena expected. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He absorbed the blow like a stone wall standing against a hurricane. The shock in Tyson's eyes was almost imperceptible, but for those paying attention, it was there a flicker of disbelief that lasted less than a second before his instinct took over. He pivoted on his feet, launching another brutal combination, fists flying at speeds that defied logic for a man of his build. Each punch carried the weight of a career built on destruction, yet Calloway remained standing, his towering frame absorbing the punishment like a force that simply refused to break. The crowd, caught between awe and chaos, couldn't decide whether to cheer or gasp, their voices blending into an electrified roar. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. At least not according to those who had seen Tyson dismantle fighters with ruthless efficiency. His game was built on intimidation, on making men hesitate before they even stepped into the ring with him. But Calloway was different. He had spent a lifetime embracing fear, feeding off the doubt of others, and turning their confidence into their downfall. He was no ordinary fighter. He was something else entirely, something that existed beyond the limits of conventional logic. For years, Calloway had thrived in an arena where pain was inevitable, where endurance was just as important as power. His battles weren't about speed or skill alone. They were about pushing past the breaking point, about proving that no amount of punishment could force him to quit. He had built an empire on the foundation of resilience, on the ability to rise no matter how many times he was knocked down. But this wasn't the world he was used to. This was Tyson's battlefield, a place where hesitation meant destruction, where even the slightest misstep could lead to a brutal end. The tension inside the ring thickened as Tyson continued his relentless assault, his fists seeking an opening, searching for the slightest weakness in the towering figure before him. But Calloway's presence was unwavering, his movements methodical, calculated. He wasn't here to simply survive. He was here to test the very limits of what Tyson could do. And as the minutes dragged on, it became clear that this fight wasn't going to follow the script that so many had predicted. Outside the ring, the world watched in disbelief. Commentators struggled to find the words to describe what was unfolding before them. Analysts scrambling to make sense of a fight that was defying every expectation. Fans on both sides were glued to their screens, drawn in by the sheer spectacle of two legends colliding in a way that no one had ever imagined. This wasn't just a fight. It was something greater, something that transcended sports. A moment in history that people would talk about for generations. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Calloway did something that sent another ripple through the crowd. After absorbing yet another barrage of Tyson's devastating punches, he slowly raised his head, his eyes locking onto his opponent with an intensity that sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened spectators. There was no anger in his expression. No frustration, only a quiet, eerie understanding, as if he had been waiting for this very moment all along. Tyson, ever the warrior, refused to back down. He had fought monsters before, had stared down men who swore they couldn't be beaten, and had proven them wrong time and time again. But this was different. There was something unnatural about the way Calloway carried himself. The way he absorbed punishment without so much as a wince. The way he stood tall despite taking blows that would have put most fighters to sleep. The battle was far from over, but one thing had become abundantly clear. This was no ordinary fight. This was a war between two forces of nature, a clash of philosophies, of power versus endurance, of brutality versus sheer unbreakable will. And as the next moment unfolded, something happened that no one, not the fans, not the commentators, not even Tyson himself could have ever predicted. Tyson took a step back, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his face as he studied the man standing in front of him. He had landed some of the hardest shots he had ever thrown, punches that had crumbled champions, shattered ribs, and ended fights in mere seconds. And yet, Calloway was still standing. He wasn't just surviving, he was watching, waiting, as if he had been testing something all along. Tyson had seen many fighters try to act tough, try to play mind games to mask their fear. But this was different. This wasn't an act. It was something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The crowd sensed the shift, the realization settling in that this wasn't going to be just another Tyson knockout. The energy in the air changed, a strange mix of awe and uncertainty gripping the arena. No one had expected it to go this way. Not the fans, not the analysts, not even those who had placed bets on an early finish. And for the first time in a long time, Tyson found himself in a situation he hadn't anticipated. He thrived in chaos, but this was unfamiliar. Then, in an instant, Calloway moved. It wasn't the slow, deliberate pace he had kept throughout the fight. This was different, an explosion of power that caught everyone, including Tyson, completely off guard. He lunged forward, his massive frame covering the distance faster than anyone expected. And before Tyson could react, a massive hand wrapped around the back of his neck, driving him backward with shocking force. The crowd gasped as Tyson stumbled, barely managing to keep his footing. He had faced strong opponents before, men who could punch, men who could wrestle. But never had he felt a force quite like this. For the first time, doubt flickered across Tyson's face. He tried to shake it off, tried to remind himself who he was, what he was capable of. But Calloway wasn't letting up. He pressed forward, using his size, his sheer presence, to smother Tyson's movement. And then, as if to send a message, he did something that sent a shockwave through the entire arena. He raised his right hand and, in one swift motion, brought it crashing down across Tyson's chest. The impact echoed through the venue, a thunderous crack that sent the audience into a frenzy. Tyson staggered, his muscles tensing as he fought to recover from the unexpected blow. This wasn't supposed to happen. Tyson was the one who dictated fights, the one who forced his opponents to play his game. Yet here he was, reacting, adjusting, trying to make sense of an opponent who didn't fight like anyone he had ever faced before. It wasn't just the strength, though, that was undeniable. It was something deeper, something in the way Calloway carried himself, the way he seemed to absorb punishment and turn it into fuel. Somewhere in the audience, a group of veteran fighters whispered among themselves, their eyes locked on the ring. They had seen Tyson destroy men before, seen him tear through some of the best in the world. But this was different. There was something eerie about the way Calloway was handling this fight, the way he seemed almost inhuman in his endurance. It wasn't just a physical battle, it was a psychological war, and slowly but surely, the momentum was shifting. Tyson clenched his fists, his breath steadying as he reset his stance. He wasn't about to let this turn into someone else's story. He had spent his entire life proving people wrong, defying expectations, carving his name into history through sheer force of will. If Calloway wanted to test him, then so be it. But there was one thing Tyson knew better than anyone. No matter how tough a man was, no matter how much he could endure, everyone had a breaking point. And he was going to find it. But just as Tyson prepared to launch his next attack, Calloway did something that sent an eerie chill through the arena. Slowly, methodically, he tilted his head back, his expression unreadable, and then without a word he smiled. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but to those watching closely, it was a moment that changed everything. Because for the first time in his career, it wasn't Tyson who was instilling fear in his opponent. It was the other way around. And in that split second, something shifted inside Tyson's mind, something he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't sure if it was anger, confusion, or something far more unsettling. But one thing was certain, he was no longer just fighting a man. He was fighting something he didn't fully understand. And for the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't sure what was going to happen next.